For over 6 decades, Carol Burnett has been America's comedy sweetheart. The woman who made us laugh until our sides hurt, who tugged at our heartstrings with her warmth, and who seemed to get along with absolutely everyone in Hollywood. But that perfect image, it wasn't the complete picture. Behind those famous curtain call ear tugs and that infectious laugh, Carol witnessed betrayals, endured professional jealousies, and navigated relationships that left permanent scars. She spent a lifetime being diplomatic, gracious, and kind. But now, at 92, she's finally ready to share the truth about 5 relationships that shaped her career in ways most people never knew. These weren't just difficult coworkers. These were people who challenged her, hurt her, and in some cases tried to diminish everything she'd built. Some were friends who turned into rivals. Others were legends who couldn't handle her success. And one of them nearly destroyed the show that made her a household name. What she reveals might change how you see some of Hollywood's most beloved figures. Because sometimes, the people who smile the brightest in public carry the deepest wounds in private. Number 5. Lucille Ball. When Carol Burnett first arrived in Hollywood in the early 1960s, there was one woman she idolized above all others, Lucille Ball. Lucy had broken every barrier, proved that women could be funny and powerful, and owned her own studio. She was the blueprint for everything Carol hoped to become. Their first meeting seemed magical. Lucy invited the young comedian to her home, gave her advice, and even helped her navigate the treacherous waters of network television. Carol was starstruck. She thought she'd found not just a mentor, but a friend. Then Carol got her own variety show in 1967. Almost immediately, the warmth evaporated. Lucy stopped returning calls. When they crossed paths at industry events, the conversations grew colder, more perfunctory. Carol couldn't understand what had changed. She'd done everything Lucy advised. She'd worked hard, stayed authentic, and built something successful. But that was precisely the problem. Years later, a mutual friend finally explained it to Carol. Lucy had expected Carol to succeed, but perhaps not quite so spectacularly. The Carol Burnett Show wasn't just popular, it became a cultural phenomenon that rivaled I Love Lucy's dominance. For the first time in decades, Lucy wasn't the undisputed queen of comedy television. The breaking point came in 1974 at an industry gala. Carol approached Lucy's table, hoping to finally clear the air. Lucy looked up at her, smiled that famous smile, and said, loud enough for others to hear, "Well, if it isn't television's newest darling, I hope you're enjoying your moment." The words were sweet. The tone was acid. Carol stood there, frozen, as Lucy turned away and continued her conversation as if Carol had vanished. That moment crystallized everything. This wasn't about a misunderstanding or a scheduling conflict. This was about a legend who couldn't gracefully make room for the next generation. Carol never spoke publicly about the incident. She continued to praise Lucy in interviews, calling her a pioneer and an inspiration. But privately, she told close friends that it was one of the most painful experiences of her career. To be rejected by your idol, not because you'd failed, but because you'd succeeded that wounds in a way few other things can. When Lucy passed away in 1989, Carol attended the funeral. She cried genuine tears. But they weren't just tears of grief. They were tears for the friendship that could have been, and for the reality of what it actually was, a one-sided admiration that turned cold the moment. Carol stopped being a protege and became a peer. The lesson Carol learned was harsh but invaluable. Sometimes the people you admire most are the least capable of admiring you back. Number 4. Harvey Korman. To the outside world, Carol Burnett and Harvey Korman were the perfect comedy team. Their sketches were flawless. Their timing was impeccable. They could make each other break character with just a look, and audiences ate it up. The chemistry seemed effortless and genuine. Behind the scenes, it was a battlefield. Harvey Korman was a brilliant performer, but he was also a man with an enormous ego and a volcanic temper. From almost the moment he joined the Carol Burnett Show in 1967, he made it clear that he saw himself as the star, not the supporting player. The first major clash came during rehearsals for a sketch in the show's second season. Carol had written a bit that featured her character prominently, with Harvey in a strong but secondary role. Harvey read through it once, then threw the script down. "This isn't what I signed up for," he announced. "I'm not here to be a prop in Carol's one-woman show." The room went silent. Carol, stunned, tried to explain that the sketch rotated focus each week, that everyone got their moments to shine. Harvey wasn't interested in explanations. He wanted changes, and he wanted them immediately. This pattern repeated itself for years. Harvey would challenge sketches, demand rewrites, and sulk when he felt he wasn't getting enough spotlight. The writers began crafting material specifically to appease him, which meant less room for other cast members and less creative freedom for Carol herself. But the real betrayal came in 1977. After 10 successful seasons, Harvey announced he was leaving the show to pursue a film career. Carol was devastated, not because she'd missed working with him by that point. The relationship was professionally cordial, but personally cold. But because of how he did it, Harvey gave interviews claiming he'd outgrown variety television, that he needed bigger challenges, better material. The implication was clear: the Carol Burnett show, the platform that had made him a star, wasn't good enough anymore. The film career Harvey had sacrificed the show for, it never materialized. Within a year, he was back on television, doing guest spots and smaller projects. He eventually returned to Carol's show for brief appearances, but the dynamic had fundamentally changed. Carol handled it with her characteristic grace. She welcomed him back, laughed with him on camera, and never spoke a harsh word about him publicly. But those who knew her well saw the hurt in her eyes. Harvey had been more than a co-star. For a brief time, she'd considered him a friend. In later years, Harvey seemed to recognize his mistakes. He gave interviews praising Carol's generosity and leadership. But some bridges, once burned, can never be fully rebuilt. They remained professional colleagues, but the warmth was gone forever. Carol learned another hard lesson. Talent doesn't excuse cruelty, and success doesn't heal wounds inflicted by pride. Number 3. Jim Nabors. This one might surprise people, because Jim Nabors and Carol Burnett seemed inseparable. Jim was a regular guest on her show, always closing the program by singing to her while she pulled her era tender moment that millions of viewers cherished. They laughed together, performed together, and Carol often called him one of her dearest friends. But in 1978, when Carol faced the darkest period of her personal life, Jim disappeared. Carol's daughter Carrie was struggling with addiction, a battle that would consume the family for years. Carol, despite her fame and resources, felt helpless and alone. She reached out to friends for support, for understanding, for just someone to talk to who wouldn't judge. Jim never answered her calls. At first, Carol made excuses for him. He was busy. He was traveling. He didn't know how to help. But months turned into years, and the silence remained. When they encountered each other at industry events, Jim was polite but distant, always finding a reason to cut conversations short. Discovered through mutual friends that Jim had explicitly told people he didn't want to get involved in Carol's family drama. He felt it was too heavy, too complicated, too far removed from the light-hearted friendship they'd shared on television. The betrayal cut deep, because Carol had been there for Jim through his own struggles. When Jim faced scrutiny about his personal life, Carol had defended him publicly and privately, never wavering in her support. She'd assumed that loyalty ran both ways. The final straw came in 1983, when Carol's daughter Carrie made a breakthrough in her recovery. Carol wanted to share the good news with the people who mattered most to her. She called Jim, hoping to rebuild their friendship now that the darkest days were behind her. Jim's assistant said he wasn't available and would call back. He never did. They continued to see each other occasionally at various events over the years. Always cordial, always surface level. Jim even made a few more appearances on Carol's later specials. But Carol knew the truth. Their friendship had been conditional, existing only when times were good and laughter came easily. When Jim passed away in 2017, Carol released a statement praising his talent and their years of collaboration. She didn't mention what she'd learned about fair-weather friends, about people who love you when you're making them laugh but vanish when you need them to listen. But those close to Carol knew the real story, and they knew she'd never fully forgiven the abandonment, even if she'd made peace with it. Number 2. Vicki Lawrence. Of all the betrayals Carol experienced, this one hurt the most because she never saw it coming. Carol Burnett discovered Vicki Lawrence in 1967, when Vicki was just a teenager. Carol saw potential in the young performer and gave her an opportunity that changed her life: a regular spot on the Carol Burnett show. Carol mentored her, protected her from network executives who wanted someone more experienced, and treated her like family. Vicki flourished. Her character Mama became a breakout sensation, eventually spawning its own spin-off series, Mama's Family. Carol couldn't have been prouder. She'd helped create a star, but success changed things as Mama's Family grew in popularity. During the early 1980s, Vicki began distancing herself from Carol's guidance. She made decisions about the character without consulting Carol, despite Carol being a producer on the show. She started giving interviews that downplayed Carol's role in her success, emphasizing her own talent and hard work instead. The real wound came in 1990. A magazine was preparing a retrospective on the Carol Burnett show, interviewing cast members about their experiences. When the article was published, Vicki's quotes were shocking. She described Carol as controlling and insecure, claiming that Carol had held her back creatively and tried to keep her in supporting roles. Long after she'd proven herself capable of more, Vicki painted herself as someone who'd succeeded despite Carol. Not because of her, Carol read the article alone in her home. She called Vicki immediately, hoping there'd been some misunderstanding, that the reporter had twisted the words or taken them out of context. Vicki stood by every word. The conversation was brief and cold. Carol asked why, after everything they'd been through together. Vicki would paint their relationship in such negative terms. Vicki responded that she was simply telling her truth, and that Carol needed to accept that her version of events wasn't the only valid one. They never worked together again. The betrayal stung for years. Carol had given Vicki her first big break, had fought for her, had celebrated her victories as if they were her own, and in return, she'd been publicly characterized as an obstacle rather than a champion. Other cast members from the show quietly reached out to Carol, expressing shock at Vicki's comments and assuring Carol that they didn't share that perspective. But the damage was done. The story was out there, part of the public record. Carol eventually moved on, but she never forgot. When asked about Vicki in interviews, Carol's responses became notably brief and carefully neutral. The warmth was gone, replaced by diplomatic professionalism. The lesson was painful. Sometimes the people you lift up use that elevation to kick you on their way to greater heights. Number 1. CBS executives. This isn't about a single person, but about a group of executives who nearly broke Carol's spirit and robbed her of control over her own creative legacy. When the Carol Burnett show ended in 1978, after 11 triumphant seasons, Carol believed she owned the rights to the show's content. After all, her name was in the title, and her contract had specified creative control. She planned to carefully curate how the show would be remembered, perhaps releasing select sketches or creating anniversary specials. Then she received a letter from CBS legal department. The network claimed full ownership of every episode, every sketch, every moment. Carol's name might have been on the show, but CBS owned the content, and they could do whatever they wanted with it. Carol was devastated. She'd spent 11 years pouring her heart into that show. She'd fought for creative freedom, defended her cast, and built something she was immensely proud of. And now, she was being told she had no say in its future. The battle that followed was brutal and lasted years. CBS began syndicating episodes, without her input, cutting sketches haphazardly to fit time slots, and editing content in ways that destroyed the original pacing and humor. They released compilation videos with garish covers and misleading descriptions. They treated the show like a commodity to be exploited, not a legacy to be preserved. Carol hired lawyers and fought back. The legal bills were staggering. The stress was overwhelming. She'd spent her days in depositions and her nights unable to sleep, wondering how something she'd created had been taken away from her so completely. The turning point came during a particularly nasty court hearing in 1982. A CBS executive testified that Carol had been merely a performer on the show, not its creative force, and that the network's production team deserved primary credit for the show's success. Carol sat in that courtroom and wept, not because she believed the lie, but because she realized this was how corporations operated. They used people up, took what they needed, and then rewrote history to justify their exploitation. The case eventually settled out of court. Carol regained some control over the show's legacy, but not nearly as much as she deserved. CBS maintained ownership of the core content, though Carol gained approval rights over certain uses and releases. The experience fundamentally changed how Carol approached her career. She became fiercely protective of her intellectual property, insisting on ownership clauses in every subsequent contract. She learned that in Hollywood, friendship and loyalty mean nothing compared to legal documents and corporate interests. Years later, when streaming services began showing interest in The Carol Burnett Show, Carol fought CBS again to ensure quality control and appropriate compensation. This time, she was prepared. This time, she had learned from her mistakes. The wounds from that battle never fully healed. Every time Carol saw her show aired or released without her input, she was reminded of how close she'd come to losing everything she'd worked for. The executives who'd fought her had long since moved on to other jobs, other battles, probably forgetting the comedian they'd tried to crush. But Carol never forgot. These 5 stories reveal something important about Carol Burnett that the public rarely sees. She wasn't just the lovable, laughing woman who pulled her ear at the end of each show. She was a fighter, a survivor, someone who navigated a cutthroat industry while trying to maintain her integrity and kindness. The betrayals hurt. The disappointments left scars. But Carol kept going. She kept performing, kept creating, kept making people laugh even when she wanted to cry. At 92, Carol Burnett has finally reached a point where she can share these stories without bitterness. She's not seeking revenge or sympathy. She's simply acknowledging that her journey wasn't as smooth as it looked from the outside. She's also teaching us something valuable. You can be hurt by people and still choose grace. You can be betrayed and still maintain your values. You can lose battles and still win the war for your legacy. Carol Burnett's story isn't just about 5 difficult relationships. It's about resilience, about surviving an industry designed to chew people up and spit them out. It's about maintaining your humanity when everyone around you is losing theirs. And perhaps most importantly, it's about the strength required to keep making people laugh when your own heart is breaking. That's the real Carol Burnett, not the image on screen, but the woman behind it, wounded but unbroken, disappointed but not defeated, hurt but still capable of enormous love and generosity. She's earned the right to tell her truth, and we're lucky she's finally sharing it. What do you think about these revelations? Were you surprised by any of these stories? Share your thoughts and let us know which relationship you found most shocking. And if you want to hear more untold stories from Hollywood's golden age, make sure to follow for more content that goes beyond the official narratives.